Hey, welcome back, faithful politics listeners and watchers. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel, we're happy to have you. Don't forget to like and subscribe because we always forget to say that. I'm
Smash
your,
that like
yeah,
button.
smash it, just crush it. I'm your political host, Will Wright, joined by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Burtram. How's it going, Josh?
Doing well, thanks, Will.
And we are so delighted to have two extremely intelligent women on the show to talk to us about all things Constitution and Supreme Court. One of them, our longtime listeners will be familiar with, is Corinna Lain. And a new person to the show, Danielle Wingfield, is here to join us as well. But I am not going to try to articulate their long curricula vitae. I'm going to let them do it themselves. So, Karina, tell our audience who you are, what it is you do, and how awesome we are.
They're so awesome. Yeah, I'm Corinna Lain. I'm a professor here at University of Richmond School of Law. I think I'm in my 23rd year, so I have been around for a minute. I'm a constitutional historian. I am a former prosecutor. I teach criminal procedure and evidence, and have my specialty is the death penalty. So I teach a course on that. And while I'm here introducing myself, I do have a book coming out Easter
Yes.
2025 called
Yay.
Secrets of the Killing State: The Untold Story of Lethal Injection. So sorry, I had to plug
Ooh.
that. And that's all I've
Well,
got.
you're going to be back on to talk about that.
I
That's
hope so.
amazing.
I hope so. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. Danielle, who are you?
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Josh, for having me. I am
Yes.
a colleague of the wonderful Corinna Lain over here at Richmond Law, and I teach constitutional law. So that's why you have me here today. My expertise is as a legal historian of civil rights. So I teach a civil rights seminar here, just perfect place in Virginia, in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for being here. We really enjoy being able to talk to smart people to kind of help educate us about what's happening in our country, our world, and one of the things I know I specifically wanted to have both of you on here to talk about is something that's kind of been out of the news cycle for a little bit, but I think still has plenty of implications, kind of more broadly for the country. And I haven't really heard very many good interpretations or good discussions about it. So I'm hoping that you all can shed light on the immunity case that seemingly gave the next president, or the current president, I guess, unlimited power. So can you tell us just a little bit about the case that um, you know gave us this immunity ruling, and what were some of the core legal principles that might have underpinned the SCOTUS ruling?
Yeah, I can kick us off with a little framing. So the 2024 SCOTUS term, we got Trump versus United States, and that case is addressing the scope of, as you just mentioned, presidential immunity. But what it's doing is building on two previous earlier decisions that is worth knowing. So we have Nixon versus Fitzgerald in 1982, and then 15 years later, the court ruled in Clinton versus Jones in 1997. Now, in Nixon, the court ruled that both sitting and former presidents enjoy absolute immunity, but it's from civil lawsuits and it's for actions taken in their official capacity. And then fast forward to Clinton, the court clarifies a bit more and held that this immunity does not extend to unofficial acts, nor does it protect a sitting president from civil actions related to acts before office. So when we arrived to 2024 with Trump versus United States, the court extends this concept of immunity, and now it's covering criminal prosecution for actions taken, and the court is calling it as an exercise of core constitutional powers while in office, right? So for actions that are within, then they create this outer perimeter. So they said, and if it's in this outer perimeter of a president's responsibilities, then there's only a presumptive immunity that would apply. So in effect, what's happening is that there's this new standard that's introducing a little bit of uncertainty because
Yeah.
now we have to, the lower courts are going to have to define or distinguish between official and unofficial acts. So what we see is the court's opinion leaving unresolved whether certain conduct by former President Trump, like, i.e., his communications with state officials about election fraud, for example, falls within his official capacity. And then so it was remanded so that the lower court could make these fact-specific determinations. That's the skinny. That's like the short part.
I have to ask to you two college professors that have to teach this stuff, like, is it frustrating or exciting when SCOTUS makes like these rulings that seem to kind of upend what most average Americans probably thought was like settled law? What's your experience, Corinna?
Well, I'm not teaching a core constitutional law. I teach constitutional law in the criminal procedure realm. And they're making decisions all the time. I just taught one this week, Torres, and I was like, well, courts they did something totally new and courts don't really know what to do with it. So we're experiencing this in real time. But, so I'm gonna pass the buck back over to Danielle, but I need you to know, like, we're so lucky. I'm gonna listen mostly and learn a lot about this immunity. I know a little bit, but like, you're talking to the expert on, all things constitutional law. But I just want to say I'm just so proud of Danielle Wingfield being here, and I'm just so proud to be her colleague. She is amazing. And so I'm just, mostly I'm just on this part. I'm like, oh yeah, okay,
I don't know,
makes a
Karina.
lot of
There's
sense
this,
because
there's this
it's a
prosecutorial
couple.
element, though.
Yeah, but you just like broke it down in a second and made it, you like flattened
That
it
was
out
awesome.
in a way that I'm like, oh, right. Yeah, it's a great big case. And I looked at it, I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, that is exactly what it says. But I couldn't have done what you just did. So anyway, kudos to you.
Yeah, no, I think thank you, Karina. I'm happy to be here with all of you, and especially you. Um, students' frustration mostly is what I have to manage, right? I don't mind. I'm here to like learn it all and teach it all. And I mean, for the average citizen, I imagine that's frustrating. And certainly for students, it's frustrating because they just want to know what the law is so that they can pass my test and go and be lawyers. And so they come in thinking they know and they kind of got it settled in their brains. And then I have to say, it's really, the court can do what it wants to do. And so I have to explain how that function is. And that certainly leads to some frustration for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think about this case and I'm like, I didn't realize about the Nixon v. Gerald or Fitzgerald rather, and Clinton v. Jones. And I'm just imagining, I'm like, okay, I go about my life and I think I can't do certain things because I will get arrested and then I will get charged. I mean, not that I'm thinking about doing a lot of illegal things, but I'm just saying in general, I kind of have this sense like I can't just do whatever. I don't have immunity from all these things. Like, would I like to have immunity? Sure. I guess I'd love to have immunity and not have to worry ever about, are my actions going to have consequences legally for me? So why is it that I can kind of walk around and have to be under this sense of law and the president of the United States doesn't? Now, I mean, I understand that, and maybe I'm getting that completely wrong. So that's kind of why I'm bringing the question out there, because it's really about what is kind of the balance here? Like, how much immunity does a president really need in order to perform their duties? Does the question make sense? I mean, it seems like they should have some way. They should be able to do things I can't, for sure, because they're running the most powerful country in the world, right? And they have to make decisions I don't ever have to think about. And yet at the same time, it seems like that even should create more accountability because of how their decisions affect a huge amount of people. I don't know. What do you guys think? I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on that.
I'll jump in first, and then Karina, you jump right on in there. I think you hit the nail on the head, Josh, right? Like there is certainly a balancing test that's happening here. And what the court is having to do is balance the need for a president to be able to perform their official duties without distraction of constant legal threats. And that's, they're balancing that against exactly what you just mentioned, the necessity of holding presidents accountable for misconduct, right? And so, the ruling in the Trump versus United States case, I read it as tipping the balance toward protecting the president's ability to perform official acts, and therefore offering more protection and immunity for these official actions, and setting the bar pretty high for being able to prosecute these actions criminally. And what we're seeing is an echo of concerns that were previously raised in Nixon about the unique position of the presidency, but it also intensifies this tension that you're pulling out between immunity and accountability, and that was highlighted later in Clinton versus Jones. And so what was interesting to me is in Justice Sotomayor's dissent, she pulls out, even more concern about the president being above the law. And as citizens, I think you're right. We don't like the feeling that the president gets to be above the law while we can't be above the law. So, no, yeah, that question makes a lot of sense. And that's exactly, I think, what the court is grappling with here. I don't know. What do you think, Karina?
Well, I agree with everything you said, of course. But I'll bring in as a former prosecutor, as your former prosecutor, I will tell you, there is a difference between the civil law and the criminal law. And, you can think of it like this. I always think of it like this. We have these bounds that we've all agreed we're going to live by. Beyond those bounds is civil liability, tort law, right? You punch somebody, you run into their car, you exceeded the bounds of the rules that we all decided to live by, you can get sued. When you go beyond the tort, beyond the civil liability, now it's like you're so far out of the bounds that we have criminalized you. We have criminalized your conduct. We've said, oh, that's way beyond civil liability. And so, when I look at that from my perspective, I say, look, it's one thing to say, as Danielle did here, to say, well, we don't really want them thinking about, I could get sued over this or that. We want them focused on what they have to do. It's an entirely different ball of wax to say you can go so far beyond that you are actually violating the criminal law. We would put ordinary citizens in jail, in prison. And in fact, some of these fake electors, they're being prosecuted for what they're doing or what they've done. So, there's this basic equity fairness principle that is just like, when you think about what the criminal law is, I don't see any, personally, if I was on the court, I'd be right next to Sotomayor for sure. Of course, I agree with her on most things, but, I'd be saying, no, criminal liability. I actually do want you thinking about that, because if you've gone so far beyond that you think you might be in the sphere of criminal liability, you can think about that all day long, because you should be subject to that, because everyone else is subject to that. And Josh, as you mentioned, the president is I actually think the president of the United States is certainly the most powerful person in the United States, single individual person. But I think there's an argument that the president of the United States is the most powerful person in the world. And for that person to be beyond the scope of criminal liability, I don't care if it's your official acts. If you are using your official, if you're in the official acts, we should care more. We should be watching more closely, not less. Not like, oh, as long as you're using your power as the president, you can also break the law. No, that's the last thing we want you doing. So anyway, again, just your former prosecutor chiming in there. I think
I agree.
yeah, I think it's a real problem. And I think it's a massive extension of what the court had done in previous immunity rulings. And now we're left with this situation of, yeah, but no president would break the criminal law. We have
Really?
relied on norms to our detriment in a certain administration not so long ago, where we saw norms are not enough. You can't just count on, the person that, gets this highest office would never break the criminal law. Well, actually,
Yeah, just to kind of also reframe the, the consequence of the ruling. Can you maybe help me explain, like, if a president were to, I don't know, like call in a drone strike on Capitol Hill or shoot protesters in Lafayette Square, um, what
hypothetically.
hypothetically, like what would the consequences have been prior to the ruling and then after the ruling? What do you
Danielle,
think,
all
Danielle?
you.
All me. Well, so here, under the new standard, it's going to depend whether it was in the president's official act, right? So in that hypo, we'd have to determine, was the president, blowing out people on the steps in his or her official duty? You know what I mean? It's gonna be a line between unofficial and official, and that's the contentious line. That's exactly where we are, and that's the danger of it. I think Sotomayor mentioned that there's this potential for abuse now, when the president is not going to be held accountable for questionable conduct because it's going to be considered within their official acts. And so what I think might happen moving forward, or what could potentially happen, are future, to Corinna's point, future presidents could push the boundaries, just as you're in your hypo, of their official duties. They can make things within, these questionable acts within their official duties, knowing that they would likely be shielded from criminal prosecution for this broad range of actions, right? So this ruling could encourage presidents to take controversial, risky, actions, because they'll have less fear of legal consequences, and that's the danger of it.
Is there I'm sorry to cut you off, but
Yeah.
is there a definition for official acts, or is it just very broad, ambiguous?
That's
Man.
broad. It's going back to the lower court, and the lower court's going to have to determine what these official acts might look like.
So like, just to put that like in perspective, like would official acts be akin to like a job description? You apply for a job, here are the things that I'm saying that I can do and I'm allowed to do. Is that similar? Because it seems like if it is, like, wouldn't official acts be somewhat defined in the Constitution?
Yeah, I think certainly have a starting point, right? The things that we would naturally think, and certainly what's defined in the Constitution, that's part of the executive, the executive's powers. We have those, explicated pretty clear. But then you have this outer limit that kind of broadens this outer limit that the court is saying. So we have a basis, but the lower courts can work within that and beyond it, it seems. I don't know, Corinna, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I could give you a real life hypo, actually,
Let's do
that
it.
is a part of this case, is that as a direct result of this case, the DOJ has now issued a new indictment, a superseding indictment. It's gone through a new grand jury. So, by the way, ordinary citizens, again, as the former president, as saying this is sham. This is, again, a whole grand jury has said, no, these are indictments. But the DOJ deleted, because it said, yeah, I think this is under the Supreme Court's ruling, deleted one of the factual allegations, which was Trump actually turned to his DOJ and said, I want you to issue a statement saying we found fraud. It wasn't true. I want you to write letters to the states saying we found fraud. It wasn't true. And like that is one allegation in the election interference case. Now, listen, the charges stayed the same, but that was one piece of evidence, and they deleted it. Why? Because he was acting in control of his, AG and DOJ, and that's in his official capacity. So like that just gives you just a little hint of what he could do, because the president is the chief executive officer. So yeah, you can make an order to your, in that very case, right? You're enlisting the DOJ to, even as you complain about a stolen election, to steal an election, to engage in illegal election interference. That would be absolutely immune. In fact, by deleting that, I mean, the DOJ clearly thinks, oh, this falls within a president's power. Wow.
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 And that's a DOJ under a opposing party for the one, right? So I mean that
this
makes
was Trump's DOJ. This was,
but I mean the one they deleted it, right? The DOJ that deleted it is Biden's
right.
DOJ, right?
That's right. Good point.
So they were even interpreting it like even more like you would think that they would be even more critical or trying to find something just because of, the way that human nature is. And they're like, well, I guess we got to delete this because now it falls under that and we're not going to be able to use it. It'll be thrown out. I'm assuming that would be their kind of reasoning.
No,
I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah. I mean, and they've done some other things that we could talk about, as far as the ramifications of this. But just to, I mean, it is chilling. It is chilling to me. And there were other allegations in the indictment about what he was that they deleted, and it was his senior advisors, his lawyers told him, look, the election was not stolen. That went into his knowledge, and they deleted that and said, actually, conversations, that's part of his of his official duties is to have conversations. So all of those conversations, we're going to go ahead and take those out. But I mean, it is chilling. What can you do as chief executive officer? You could, going back to your hypo, Will, you could order people being shot. You could say, well, this was part of security mob control. Sorry, we had to do it, but yeah, lives were lost, but I declared a national emergency. Frankly, you could declare a national emergency. That's within, I mean, Danielle can speak on this more than I can, but that's within the presidential's powers. And then you could suspend an election.
Yep. And you know what, Corinna, that's such a good point, because what it seems like is happening is that the congressional oversight and the judiciary's ability to check the president's actions are now so much more weakened. So you have impeachment. Okay, that's a constitutional check on the presidential powers. I mean, maybe, right? We saw that.
Our twice impeached, former president, like that did nothing.
No, that does nothing. And so Congress's investigative authority and judicial review, now they're constrained by this presidential immunity ruling.
And to piggyback on your point, Danielle, during the impeachment proceedings, you may recall that certain members of the president's party said, we're not going to vote for impeachment. Let the criminal process handle that. Let the legal process handle that. There is no legal process.
Yeah.
And those impeachments both went through, not with their votes, but I mean, they went through anyway. What did change? I mean, will now be a president with no guardrails. It makes it even more important that we, people who say, well, I'm voting for policies, character doesn't matter. Actually, it upends the whole thing where it's like, do you just vote for character and policies don't matter? That makes me sad too.
Yeah.
What makes me sad is the law is being suspended. And so we're forced as voters. It's like, wait a minute, what is our power? What is our responsibility? I mean, as Danielle says, the institutions we think of. And you think about, like, this court is the, oh, originalists, let's go back to the founding fathers. The founding fathers, you know, they were distrustful. They were distrustful of the very situation that we've had. They were distrustful of power in any one branch. And that's why they made the whole, you know, separation of powers and everybody's checking everybody else, because they didn't trust, right? Absolute power is power that is corrupted. Here we are, despite our founding fathers, despite this court saying, oh yeah, we're originalists. Like, wow.
So to even make this more real to our listeners,
And scary.
right? And maybe scary. So I'll throw another hypo. What if President Trump, or or the next president, whoever it is, they get, well, just for a hypothetical, President Trump, they find out, hey, faithful politics gets on their radar, and they're like, I don't know about that Will and Josh character. Josh did like me, then he didn't. And then I get an FBI raid on my house. Is that possible under this presidential, like, immunities thing?
Go for it, Corinna.
I'm like, well, it depends on
I mean, I'm
whether
just wondering, yeah.
it depends on whether you say it's an official act. I think if you put a tag on there and say, and by the way, isn't this like happening in Florida? Isn't this like DeSantis sent in people who were signing a petition and said, well, we're investigating election fraud, but the only people that they're looking at are people that signed the petition for the abortion rights. I'm not really following that, but I'm like, actually, like, what is happening here? But I think if you put an official tag on it, which from now on they will, then I'm like, yeah, I think they could. What do you think, Danielle?
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think it points to this, I don't know, one of the issues that is coming from this is that this decision, and along with some others that have come out recently, we're limiting congressional oversight. We're trending toward this super strong executive, this emboldening, powerful super executive, I'll call it. And it's, I don't know, the trajectory is scary, right? A court that's more willing to protect the executive authority, exercising within their official powers, and we can call anything within their official powers. I don't know. It's signaling things ahead. I think we should be concerned.
Man, that's really sobering, and that's wild. I want to kind of get into the weeds a little bit. I know we have been going with hypotheticals and stuff like that, but if we think about, like, the SCOTUS ruling, thinking about a broad versus a narrow interpretation of presidential immunity, what does that mean? Like, broad versus narrow? Kind of, I know we've been kind of talking about powers, talking about official acts and things like that. What would a broad interpretation be? What would a narrow interpretation be? And what were kind of the arguments that, what were the arguments that prevailed in this? Why did the Supreme Court say in its official ruling that, these are the reasons why we think this presidential immunity should be treated the way that it now is?
Yeah. This ruling.
Real fast, can I just tack on one more question to that? Because I think it's in the same vein. Is, like, what was the count? 5-4, whatever the case, 6-3, and was it from all the same people that we would expect to vote in favor of it?
Mm-hmm. So let's do the broader narrow. It's certainly a broader interpretation of presidential immunity, because now we're shielding actions that we could define however you want to under official duties. So the majority is arguing what we've already kind of gone over, right? The president needs this insulation in order to fulfill their constitutional role effectively. And then you have the dissent that's warning that this is going to be too much, which we just kind of went down that rabbit hole with hypos of what it could look like when the president is above the law and not held accountable for questionable conduct. So the majority is attempting to alleviate the concerns by emphasizing that, well, it only applies to official acts, but that's the issue, that what's official and unofficial still remains contentious. I'll have to, will look at how it broke down. It was certainly a 6-3 ruling, and um, but I have to look at who did what there. It's escaping me at the moment.
It's okay if you don't have it readily available. I mean, if you tell me it's 6-3,
You
my
can
initial,
probably get. I
I
think
could probably
it broke
guess
down how we thought it would for
that
sure.
that
Yeah.
there
Your
were no
powers of inference, Will, are
yeah
great.
I was gonna
my
say, if somebody asked me like who were the vote, like I would I wouldn't, that's not something I would track, but like the 6-3, I'm like, well, we do have the six conservatives, and I cannot
yeah
imagine that one of the more progressive members of the court would have
Yeah.
said that this was okay. In
yeah
what
yeah.
world?
It's almost like I can say with some level of confidence that there was no male dissent. Um, much as the same way I can say that regardless of who wins the election in 2024, Trump will say that he won.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um, so, but I want to kind of shift gears here a little bit and just talk about like the balance of power, right? Because we have, executive, legislative, judicial, all of these branches are supposed to kind of balance each other out. I think, you can have a good debate on who has more power, Congress or the president, but with the immunity ruling, on the surface, it seems like the balance has shifted a little bit. So I'd love for you just to kind of talk about like did it shift, or is it just a perception thing? And then maybe we can tack on, like how do we hold presidents accountable now, or do we?
Yeah. I mean, it appears to shift, Will. I think you're right. I think we're shifting, we're leaning toward favoring the executive branch now in a way that Corinna just mentioned the founding folks were trying to warn against. So now especially since we're expanding the scope of action, protected under this umbrella of official duties. So this is going to strengthen, the presidency at the expense of other branches like Congress and the judicial checks that we have in place. So I think there are long-term consequences for the separation of powers. And how do we check? I mean, impeachment. That's a that's what we have in the Constitution right now. I don't know, criminally, what do we have, Corinna? On the constitutional side, we have impeachment.
That is so unsatisfying.
I know.
I know.
So I can tell you what DOJ, what Jack Smith's office has done, which is because these, the conduct is so outrageous and such a deep cut to democracy itself. That, what that means, as Danielle said, there's the official acts, absolute immunity. There's this, what did you call it, Danielle? The outer umbrella
The
or
outer
something?
perimeter. Yeah,
Outer
the outer
perimeter, where it's like, there's presumption, you're going to go back. And then there's private acts, which don't enjoy immunity. Am I right on that? I just
That's
want to make
right.
sure. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So, in the wake of that, I thought it was sort of interesting because Jack Smith filed a superseding indictment, as I mentioned. And what's interesting about it is all four charges remain. Okay. So like the charges themselves, Jack Smith's office, the DOJ, is at least saying, no, they stick. They're so bad that, they're criminal and they're outside official scope. So here's what they did, though, which I think is just very interesting. They tweaked the indictment. So now it makes an allegation. It says that Trump had no official responsibilities for Congress's certification of the 2020 election, right? So now it's like, well, okay, everything in his official responsibilities, he had none when it comes to this thing of certifying. So, it's like, we're going to do all that we can. And I mean, I think it's right. It's like, yeah, that's right. But to put it out, not in that umbrella, not in that perimeter where people are going to argue it, but, in the side of there's no official responsibility here. Also, the speech he made at the Capitol, we have to fight. I'll be there with you, which of course he wasn't. But his speech there, they added language that said this was a campaign speech at a privately funded, privately organized political rally. True. The opening lines of the indictment, which had said Trump was the 45th president, now says Trump was a candidate in the 2020 election. Right? Because the things that he was doing, at least, his rally that, became an insurrection, that was actually as a candidate. And it was privately funded. But that's the sort of thing I think that we can expect to see. As for myself, I think, okay, A, smart. B, I believe DOJ when DOJ says, listen, a lot, what we have, the core of the indictment, these charges is outside. Now you've made us prove it. Now you've made us allege it. We're happy to comply. We will now be more clear. And actually, they also filed requesting permission to add now a new brief that they have said we're going to add, we will now be adding new factual allegations that we were actually holding. We don't know what those are yet, but I'm sitting there, when I read about that, I thought, oh, be careful what you ask for, because they had things that are clearly within your private, or at least they're going to allege, are out clearly outside as a private candidate, right? The RNC, right? The National Republican Committee, NRC, sorry, that's not government, that's private. And so the things that were happening through that, his phone call with, the Georgia officials, I just need 11,000 so many votes. That's actually not within his official capacity. That's not what a president does. And so, in this case, it's so beyond the pale that I think there will be things that remain. But it for me at least, that's just a reflection of how egregious the behavior is. It does not give me solace that, oh, well, there's some guardrails for all the reasons we've talked about. There are not. A sitting president can do so much within their official capacity. It's just that the DOJ charges are about, the election interference and what happened after the election.
Couldn't like a real, bright, creative lawyer, like which I think Todd Blanche was one of his main lawyers that he paid like $3 million to defend him, but couldn't like a lawyer just say, yeah, if it deals with the elections, counting the elections, securing the elections, that's a duty that falls under the executive, because even though the counting of the electoral votes in Congress, it's like one could extrapolate, it's a process in the election sort of system to pick a president. So anything that I do, to further that particular process is within my official duties. Would that be a good argument, or would that just be shot down like nothing?
What do you think, Danielle? I mean, I'm curious as to your opinion as to whether you think that would fly.
I think that'd be a stretch. I think executive power is actually a little bit more narrow in the Constitution than, I think that would be slightly outside of just the scope of president of the executive power. Though I think to Corinna's point, creative lawyering is going to cut both ways on this moving forward. I mean, it's going to take smart, bright lawyers to argue both sides and see what can stick, I think. I don't know. What do you think, Corinna?
Yeah, I mean, I look at that and say he's the chief executive officer. That's what the president
That's
is the
mhm.
executive officer. But does an election fall within executive? You know, the executive branch is to execute the
Ex-
laws.
yeah,
So I'm like, could you put it? Well, I'm working on executing this law, this election law,
yeah,
like maybe, but at that point he had already lost the election. And I think again, so maybe I'm just biased, but I'm like, yeah, if it was privately funded and privately organized, and by private, I assume they're talking about the Republican Party. I assume they're talking about these political action committees that were, I can't remember what it is, Turning Point USA or whatever the thing is. But, um, I think the stronger argument is no, this was outside. But, now we could turn and think about how important it is of the judge who's actually hearing this,
yeah,
and we're very, very fortunate, I think. And I say this not as a partisan, but I've followed Judge, is it Chukan's
And check in, yeah.
rulings on some other issues. That's a good judge. That is a good, I mean, my sense is this judge has made some rulings that perhaps she has not personally liked to make, but she's going to follow the law. But one could think about, other judges and the fact of just like how damaging that first term was, because there were judges appointed for lifetime appointments that the ABA said were not qualified, didn't matter. It was all, and Trump said, I have a list. It was given to me by the Federalist Society. It was given to me by the Heritage Foundation, and so it's just like we lost, and those are there for us, that's the gift that keeps giving. I think Judge Cannon is a part of that personally, but I just now it's like really going to matter, just as Danielle says. Well, you're going to see creative lawyering on both sides. Sure, you sure are, but it also puts pressure on the judges that are hearing this, and there were an unprecedented number of appointments.
yeah. That's so true, Karina. I mean, I think,
Mm.
well, to you and Karina's point, Article 2 of the Constitution gives the president the responsibility to execute and enforce the laws created by Congress. That's broad language. You know what I mean? Like, so, I mean, I guess we'll see, Will.
I
You
kind of
know,
wish you hadn't asked that question.
I mean, so
Throwing it out there.
I'm just thinking like,
Yeah.
okay, so we have official v unofficial duties, right? So we've kind of talked about how that has to be interpreted. That's wide. That can be broadly interpreted or narrowly interpreted. But what might be a distinction? Like you had mentioned it's privately funded. So what would be the distinction, some general rules between official and unofficial duties? And is this something like, is Congress going to have to come up with like, or maybe like there'll be a move to try to come up with a list of real official, like very specific official versus unofficial duties in order to put a check on presidential power?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Josh. And I think it really builds on what we were just talking about. So Article 2 of the Constitution is what's outlining the powers of the president or the executive. And that's the language I just gave us, which is very broad. You're responsible for executing, the laws of Congress, and that's broad. And that's unlike um, powers that are like expressly listed under Article 1 of the Constitution, where we have a list of Congresses and like so the executive and under Article 2 isn't listed in that way. And so that's why we're getting this broad interpretation thing happening, and because we don't have explicit lists of things that are falling under the powers of the presidents, we're just getting that he has to be able to do, he or she or they have to be able to do what's necessary to ensure the day-to-day affairs.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, will there be legislation or something like that? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Danielle, but I don't think that Congress, because that would be like Congress saying this is what falls under Article 2. That's a
Yeah.
matter of constitutional interpretation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, Congress might have something to say about it. This is what we think, which would be, part of what gets considered. But it's the courts, it's the duty of the court to say what the law is, to say what the Constitution means. And
Yeah.
so, this would be something I assume that would be, this is the sort of thing where you get case law, right? This stuff gets fleshed out by litigation. And at some point, some later case, I hope we never see another case like this.
Yeah.
I hope we never have another executive that brings us to a place where we're here. Part of the reason we're here is because it's such a blank slate. We've never had, in the entire history of the Republic, we've never had anything like this. But
What?
I think future cases, and so how does that make you feel, Josh, that this would possibly go
Yeah.
back up to the Supreme Court to sort this out?
I don't. It doesn't make me feel great. And I guess my question that comes is why has this been the case that it's such a blank slate? Is it because, like you guys had said earlier, I mean, it's just like there are norms
We've
that
never
people
had
just
a
assumed that people would follow, just proceed norms and procedure, but nothing official. Why is this? Why are we in this situation? I guess.
Do you want to take
Go
it?
ahead, Corinna, take it.
Oh, I'm just like, because we've never had a criminal former president, Like, literally, if you think about this, even Nixon, he resigned,
Yep.
like, we've never, and never, like, never ever Taylor Swift, ever, right? Never have we had a president not participate in the peaceful transition of power. Like, not ever. And that's what that case is about, is resisting the peaceful transition of power. And so it's just like, to the extent we've had malfeasance in the office, it's been, as Danielle said, about civil liability.
Yeah, so we have an election coming up.
No, you don't
Um,
say.
not sure if you're aware. Um, what do you think this type of ruling will have? Um, you know, kind of two things, both in the public trust of like our judicial system, um, and then more broadly on the political system. Um, I mean, and part of my fear isn't so much Trump, getting elected back into office, you know, running amok of the government, of our democracy. It's the person that comes after Trump, that will see what, Trump did and be like, oh, he didn't dare to dream big enough. And that's the person I'm probably more afraid of. So I'd love to just get both of your thoughts kind of on the, public trust on the judicial system, and then implications of this ruling kind of on our broader political system. You can go, Danielle.
Yeah. Um, I mean, just listening to all four of us on this podcast, there's a lot of skepticism and online and uncertainty, which is at all levels right now. And so I certainly think, as far as public trust is concerned, especially given the timing of a very polarized political climate, public trust goes down, right? I mean, if it's not already tanked, I don't know if it can go lower. If there's any lower it can go, I think that's the way it goes. Um, I think everything's getting more deeply divided after this. You know what I mean? Like, so no matter how you're viewing this, through whatever partisan lens, I think the trust of things goes away. As far as influence on elections, I certainly think it's the ruling is going to play a part in the framing, right? So the framing of political power is going to come up a lot until we get through November. Candidates are going to be very vocal about their position on executive accountability. We're going to see one party advocating for a stronger check on the president. The other is going to be in defense. I mean, I just what you think is going to happen. I think it's going to happen. I think it will happen. And I think this will have an impact on how voters are going to perceive accountability, balance of power. And I think that will have a big impact on what happens in November, depending on whether we want to see a bigger check or a lesser check on that power.
Um, so one question I've had, and I'd love all three of your perspectives on this, is how much are people paying attention? Because people like Danielle, and me to a lesser extent, I've been with the death penalty for a while and thinking about that. But people who are thinking constitutional law professors are very, like they're paying attention and they see the danger. The very fact that you had this podcast says, okay, I'm paying attention to this. But note how you opened it. An issue that hasn't gotten a whole lot, like, do you think people are paying attention? So that's a question I would love to have, I'd love to hear y'all's perspective. Now, that having been said, I think Kamala Harris has done, has contributed to people paying attention. I think part of her talking points are, you need to understand what a second term would look like. And we've got this immunity. You think he was unhinged before. He's got no guardrails. I mean, she's literally said he would have no guardrails. That guy, by the way, the guy that told you to inject bleach, like that guy would have no guardrails. So I feel like she's making it more prominent, but it's always a thing, really, when the Supreme Court issues these huge decisions and they're mainly legalistic. Like, you overturn Roe versus Wade and the country's like awake. But other decisions that are absolutely as impactful, are kind of belong to the lawyers. Until they don't, until those, someone gets in without guardrails and it's like, wait a minute, they can do that. And then it's too late. So, I think you're right. I think, Danielle, I think one party is like really scared and trying to make it more prominent. I think there's another party that's trying to make it less prominent. Oh, don't you worry about that.
Yeah.
But I don't know how much it's out there. I know, Kamala Harris is trying to put it out there, but I don't have a sense of that because I do feel like I'm invested in paying attention. What do you think, Danielle? Do you think it's out there? And then I really do want to hear from like Josh and Will too.
I'm not sure. Maybe Josh and Will can speak. Maybe we're out of touch with just the greater public. I don't know. Maybe Josh and Will, are the people aware of what's happening?
I mean, I probably would be a little bit more representative than Will because he pays attention so deeply to this stuff. And I don't mean that in any negative way. It's awesome. But he's tuned in to all of this. And I kind of sometimes intentionally don't tune in to some of this stuff because of, how stressful it can be. But I think that's part of the double-edged sword of all this is that, you're like, I don't know. Well, because I've always kind of grown up thinking, who cares who's president? I mean, it felt like it doesn't really matter. I mean, yeah, this person, they're going to argue and this person likes abortion more and this person, is for same-sex marriage and then all that. But I don't know. It doesn't really affect me. And in many ways it hasn't. And yet that doesn't have to remain the same. And maybe I just don't even know the ways that it has because it's imperceptible at first. And like you said, then we don't know until we have to face some issue that we didn't think we'd have to face. And I think in the last few presidents, the most, and I've got, I've really come into my adult, life, I graduated in 2004 from high school. So I really came into my adult life when Obama was being elected in 2008 and then kind of saw, felt the effect more of the presidency. So I don't know if that's me getting older or if there's really more of an effect. I think it's a little bit of both at this point. But I mean, I was aware of the immunity ruling, but I wasn't aware necessarily of the implications of it. That this conversation has kind of, brought it back to my attention. I'm like, man, that's not good. It's not good. I don't know. What do you think, Will?
Yeah, so I would agree. I don't think you all are disconnected. I think that folks are following the immunity thing kind of in the same vein that they may be following, dog eating kind of thing. It's like they know it's out there. They don't necessarily know the true implications. They assume that there are certain guardrails still in place, that Trump would not, actually shoot people in Lafayette Square. He wouldn't actually try to put a moat around the United States and fill it with alligators. Like all things he's actually considered, and people are just, I don't know, they're comfortable not knowing, kind of like what Josh just said. But my biggest concern would be the first time Democrats utilize the immunity ruling to protect, their president. So, for instance, if the special weaponization of government like committee goes after Biden for something, that he did as president, and they try to subpoena him, and they go through this whole thing, and then the person that the person that represents the United States in Supreme Court cases, what's that person called again? Forgot.
The Solicitor General.
Thank you.
Solicitor
Yeah.
General,
So
yeah.
like
Somehow I had that in my mind.
Oh, I should have
somehow,
let
and
you
you
take
didn't.
that. Sorry.
No,
I was like just being the like.
You were much better to take that because it was like solicit.
yeah. So like if the Solicitor General ends up using, the immunity argument, then like there goes any hope whatsoever of us trying to change it, because it's almost like now the Democrats have found some use for it, and now our entire democracy is just, that there are no guardrails. So,
I hear you, brother.
It is sort of depressing, sad. One of the reasons I wanted to record this episode is just to hopefully shed some light on the subject to the 100 or so people that are going to listen to this, and just try to bring awareness. Like, hey, like you can think all the things you want about Trump or Biden, and about the implications, but try to think bigger. Think about the person that's going to be worse than
the
Biden
person we don't know
Trump.
about yet.
Yeah, the person that we don't know anything about. Like what if Michael Avenatti decided to run for president? Like that'd be a nightmare, and he's a Democrat. So I think just people need to kind of think past the goal line, about the dangers that we're not expecting or seeing. So,
Well, that makes me, I'm just so thankful that you had an episode and that we were able to have this conversation. That makes this work that you all do with Faithful Politics all the more important because, you
Absolutely.
are, a way, you're that funnel that can help get, the word out to ordinary people who then might just be outraged enough to post on Facebook or talk to their neighbor about it or say like, would you believe this? And, so you just don't know the effect that it had, but I know that, I'm happy. I, for one, was really happy to be here and,
Thank you both.
yeah.
Thank you. And so before we close, I do need to ask you, Corinna, just a little bit about this book. So
Oh.
tell me about this book that you've been working for and over for so long, seems
A
like it.
labor of love, a call of faith. I don't get to the faith part, frankly, until the acknowledgments. So, it's not a book where I talk about faith, but it was certainly a call to write it came from that. But it's called Secrets of the Killing State and the Untold Story of Lethal Injection. And I wrote it for a smart, intellectually curious general public. So, I'm not just talking to other law professors or, academics or researchers. I'm trying to talk to everyone. And interestingly enough, my editor, since we're on Faithful Politics, my editor at NYU Press chose Easter 2025 as the release date. So it's coming out Easter 2025. She said it's a good time to think about state killing and redemption. And I was
Yes,
like,
you're
all
right.
right, yes, it is. Okay, let's go. Well, anyway, I have since found out, I just found out last week. So Easter 2025, again, the release date that was set, nearly a year ago, 18 months in advance. Easter 2025 will be the Jubilee in the Catholic Church, which I'm not Catholic, so this is news to me. But apparently the Pope declares once every 25 years-ish that Easter will be the Jubilee. And thousands upon thousands of pilgrims come to Rome, to the Vatican, to celebrate this once-a-generation Easter. And I only know really about this because a friend of mine forwarded me. The Pope has declared the theme for the Jubilee is hope. And his Exhibit A that he wants to talk about, like, I don't know if it's the only thing or if it's the main thing, but is ending the death penalty.
What?
So
Wow.
I was, yeah, right. I was like, wait a minute. The day our book comes out, the day my book, but I say our because NYU Press is amazing, but they've been a great partner. But the day that book comes out, the world's Catholics will be listening to the Pope talk about ending the death penalty. So I'm like, well, faithful politics. Faithful
That is
politics.
absolutely amazing. Now,
Yeah.
I do have to ask. So, as a professor that writes a book, can you make that required reading of your students just to kind of help with the sales? Like, can you just go ahead and ask the
No,
school to
Of
I would
course
buy
you
never do
can.
that.
She has
50,000
professor
copies?
immunity, professorial
Oh, there we
immunity.
go. Back to immunity. We can talk more about the book another time. I hope we'll, have other
I'm trying to
conversations
get. It's going to
about
be a
it.
great book. I'm excited about that book. I have kind of seen her in the
Oh,
process, and
oh,
it's going to be fantastic. So I'm excited about it.
Me too.
I need to give a plug. I mean, which, I ordinarily would not do, but it's Faithful Politics. Danielle Wingfield has been my prayer warrior sister. She has walked the walk. She has walked this walk, and actually she is in my acknowledgments because in my lowest moment, it was her prayer that sustained me.
That's
Yeah,
so
So
cool.
that's
anyway,
awesome.
there was a very low
Faithful
moment and
politics.
it was all her, but she's been there, she's been walking with me this entire time. So very grateful
That
for that.
is super,
I love
super
it.
awesome. Well, thanks again, you two, for
Yeah.
stopping by, hanging out with us for a little bit, answering our questions. And as more unfolds on this topic, I would love to have you back. So
Thanks for
thanks
having
again.
us.
And thanks to our audience. And remember, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. And we'll see you next time. Take care.